Exploits are not something new to speedrunning, and it is often actually assumed that speedrunners will use these throughout the run. But sometimes there are exploits found that are so fundamentally game-changed that new categories are made for them, or sometimes even the rules of speedrunning leaderboards are changed because the exploit would make the run unbearable, or simply break the spirit of the category altogether. Or in some rare cases, the spirit of speedrunning altogether. The exploit I will talk about here did the last thing to such an extreme level that the run I submitted was over 2 minutes faster in second place, despite the run taking 20 minutes longer to perform. Not bad just for an exploit, huh? Before I go into the exploit, I must explain why this contradiction is possible. It is going to be very important later to explain what mechanics the exploit abuses and why it worked. Speedrunning leaderboards can be measured in several ways. The two most common ways are real-life time and in-game time. Both of these count with pros and cons that makes them more suitable in different cases. The advantage of the real-life timer is that it is always going to accurately measure the time it takes from the start of the run to the end of the run, which in theory sounds phenomenal and something that every speedrun should do. However, there are plenty of cases where a real-life timer is actually far less accurate as a measure of skill than an in-game timer, as a measurement of how quickly the actual player beat the game. As it's possible for an in-game timer to actually ignore the loading times, which especially on PC games can have a huge effect on the real-life time from run to run. There is also the fact that the runner and eventually the verifier has to time it correctly, and in the case of ILs in particular that often have been decided by frames, IGT can avoid the need for frame counting for verification. Historically, full runs are often counted in real time, in case of PC games often with the help of auto splitters with load removals, while ILs in games with an in-game timer are counted by in-game time. This is due to the fact that early on in the history of speedrunning and time attacks, this was often the only reliable and readily available way to verify runs. This does also mean that in some games the strategies for optimal individual level runs and full game runs can differ heavily, as some strategies might cost more load time to occur, but in theory, in terms of time played, actually is faster. To show an example of this, I have made a Mario Maker course here to explain how that could work. As you can see from the example above, the in-game timer and real-life timers can give absolutely different results due to what the in-game timer decides to cut or not. The exploit I am going to show off here does this to an extreme unprecedented level. This exploit I am calling Belong a Second. A name like this is pretty self-explanatory. But what does it do and what was the effect of the exploit? Before we go on, I should probably explain why I call it an exploit rather than a glitch. Normally when people hear about weird interaction with the game, they assume it is a glitch. This is, however, not the case here. What is used here is a fully intended game mechanic, but pulled to its absolute extreme. The game in question is Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. In Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, there is an in-game timer and many levels makes use of this for the time limit for the completion of levels. However, many special attacks in the game has very long animations, so therefore for many special attacks, they made it so that the player would not be punished for using such special attacks. As if they were, it would actually almost always be better to not use them. Yes, that is how long these animations we talk about are. They made a timer stop whenever a special attack is used. Most of these specials are limited to different special meters that have to be filled or drained to be used. This mechanic did seemingly not pose any threat to the legitimacy of IL runs, which used to be timed with in-game timer, and an argument could actually be made that use of specials to save time was actually a healthy system for speedrunning, as filling up these meters to perform these moves often required active input from the player. However, that will come to change when I will make a couple of discoveries that together would make future use of the in-game timer very problematic for the game. It happened as I was about to chase some IL records in Divine Beast battles, and then I know something strange when watching my own run compared to world record at the time. Despite my run being a second faster real time about, it was actually slower in game time by seconds. Something was off. I noticed the run did one of Mippa's Divine Beast's attacks that had a cutscene at a certain part of the level where it normally is not used. I started to replicate that and easily saw my times drop a little bit. Even though it was well known at the time that the time would stop for specials, most Divine Beast attacks with cutscenes actually does not stop the timer. The reason for this is likely because the developers did not think that players should be encouraged to spam these in time limited levels. The exception was made for one move though, as it was mandatory to complete most of Mippa's Divine Beast battles. From there I started working, and once I was done I had loved the time to a respectable 0 minutes and 0 seconds in game time. Yes, you heard that right. How is that possible? The attack is putting you in a standstill position, so when you move the timer most certainly must move upright. Normally, that would be true. However, whenever the timer stops, it seems like it actually does not just stop, but rather restarts the second you are on. As I have no idea about the source code of the game, I can only assume how the timer is most likely working, but here's my assumption. My assumption is as follows. When the timer starts, it is given a signal that says that once a certain amount of time has passed, it should subtract 1 from the timer, but ignore that signal if a special attack is taking place and restart cycle once this is done. The result, no matter the cause, is that if you spam special attacks, you can keep playing on the same second for an infinite amount of time, therefore the name of the exploit, the longest second. It might have been intended or not, as it would be very easy to miss, as if you were never intended to be able to put specials back to back in the way that you can do with Mippa's Divine Beast's wall breaking move. However, the result of this would therefore affect more rounds to use Mippa's Divine Beast levels. How many? Every single one of the IL rounds. You see, the problem here becomes that if you did keep timing with in-game timer, you would either have to ban the use of any kind of special move that stops the timer, or live with the fact that there could be several seconds differences between 2 almost identical runs, because one run kept pulling off their specials at the very final frame of a second, which is almost impossible to time properly, making it essentially several RNG checks per run that are impossible to tell if you succeed with or not. Therefore, the solution that the moderation team came up with was to rewrite the rules for all of the individual level leaderboards to force them to be timed by real-time attack. In effect, wiping all individual level leaderboards, as everyone previously optimized the strategies for in-game time rather than real-time attack. Thankfully, this happened very early on in the game's life cycle, meaning that there weren't too many runs on the board, and that most of the runs were improvable. This story begs the question though, should we ever use in-game timers if exploits to this level are possible that can wipe entire leaderboards? In my opinion, yes. There are plenty of good reasons to keep using in-game timers wherever they are possible. The potential to remove loading times are huge, especially on PC, but also on console, because you see, even on console, loading times can heavily differ. On Nintendo Switch, for example, whenever or not you use a physical cartridge and whenever or not your game is saved on the Switch itself or an SD card does heavily affect loading times, meaning that if runs are timed with real time, everyone who owns a physical copy of the game is inherently at a large disadvantage. And let us not even go into how strong load times can affect PC games depending on what hardware each individual runner has. So therefore, there is indeed value in using in-game timers. And they are often even used despite them being exploitable in many cases because of this very reason. A common way to exploit in-game timers or times with load removals is, as the example of my Super Mario Maker level before demonstrates, to make use of transportations with loading times, as in real time it is indeed faster to travel from point A to point B without using the bunch of warp pipes I put in place. By far actually. But with load removals, the routing can change as loading times are no longer held against your time. It is a price to pay and fundamentally is a topic that each and every community has decided for by themselves on a category to category basis. This is just my opinion however, and I would love to hear yours as well. What is your stance on this topic of in-game timer versus real life time? And when they should be used? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you liked the video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel for more gaming related content from me in the future. Also, if you're interested in starting speedrunning but have no idea what to run, feel free to watch my video on how to quickly pick a speed game, where I go through a fast process I use when I have no idea what I want to run. If you want to see a speedrun of mine, I do strongly recommend the first ever sub 4 bleed to endless normal unseeded run, which was a milestone which had been known about for so long to be possible, and finally was pulled off. Until next time, play the fogs and stay cute and wonderful, and I'll see you then. Goodbye, and have a good one.